Hey guys, welcome back to another video. Today I have another piece of avionics to take apart. This one is a VHF transponder from Collins. Here's our information plate on the front. This is a VHF transceiver, so it's both a transmitter and a receiver for aircraft communications in the VHF frequency range. I'm not exactly sure what kind of plane this came from, but I do know it's from some kind of business jet. Here we have a heat sink with two transistors underneath, and you can access them by pulling off these little metal pieces here, and then you can clip them back into place. Here we have the back. We have a nice multi-pin connector with a coax connection right there. Here is our screw to take the aluminum cover off, and you can see it was serviced by Duncan Aviation. Now that I've turned the screw, I can pull the cover off. Here's our cover. Apparently this is revision B. And here we have the first look of the inside. Okay, on this side you can see our amplifier board here. We have some various other metal shielding, and all this is one board here. You have this little compartment up here with some more parts in it. This side over here is completely covered up with shielding, and on the bottom here we can see another circuit board. On both sides we have some rather big caps. You can see the lacing is come undone. These caps are 700 microfarad and 50 volts DC. These white components right here in the middle of the board are high frequency, high power transmitting transistors. These guys would amplify the high frequency signal so it's powerful enough to be transmitted from the aircraft's antenna. You can see we have another little transistor here with a little circular heat sink on it. These power transistors have studs that go through them so they can be mounted to this piece of aluminum here for heat dissipation. You can see that there's some thermal compound. And here we have a capacitor down here and two more here. We have these rather interesting looking inductors here that are mounted on this little bolt here. And here we have a little trimmer. We have what looks like some kind of IC. This must be a ground post here. I have some other parts in there too, some resistors and diodes. And those little black boxes there are probably capacitors. And you can see that we have a piece of coax wire going down through here. It looks like it connects to the power amplifier board. Okay, now I'm going to take this cover off. Under here you can see some wire connections. We have two transistors and some capacitors and resistors and a few diodes. It looks like there's one screw in the middle here that's holding on this box, so let's take that out. Okay, now the box is a little bit more loose, but it's being held in by the wires. Here's what's underneath. You can see we have two coax wires going into here. Okay, next I'm going to take this cover off here. We have 5 screws holding it on. Okay, here's what's underneath. It looks like we have some high frequency stuff in these little chambers here. It looks like there's a few coils and some capacitors. And we have a few other components in the last one here. We have more trimmers here on the bottom. Okay, now I'm going to take this board off that's being held on by 4 screws here. Okay, underneath this board we have a capacitor, some wiring here. We have a coax wire here that goes into this chamber here. Over here we have the connections to the transistors that are here. My guess is this is the output wire coming from the amplifier. On the back side of this board we have 2 transistors And we have this weird little peg here that the wires are wrapped around. On the other side, we have those trimmers. We have some big transistors, we have some smaller transistors, and we have a lot of these carbon resistors. We have some nice glass body diodes here. Okay, I'm gonna get all this put back together and we'll start looking at the other stuff over here. Okay guys, let's take a look at what we've got on this side. We have some trimmers over here that are mounted really neatly. These trimmers here are labeled squelch threshold, carrier squelch, and audio level. You can see down here we have these components that look like they could be transistors, but they aren't. They have 7 legs. There's some kind of IC or something. And we have several of those. We have these 2 and these 2. And we have this weird little black cylinder here with wires coming out of it. Okay, here's this little riser board. It looks like we only have a transistor and a few other parts on it. I wonder if they like ran out of room or something, so they had to put it on this little board. I'm not sure why else they would do this. Okay, let's take a look what we got underneath this cover here. Okay, underneath this little box, it looks like we have 2 capacitors and a resistor. And it looks like this is where a coax wire is connected. They have the ground soldered around it and the middle wire coming through right there. On most of these covers, they've actually added these little metal pieces to keep the screws in so they don't fall out. It's a very nice design. You can see even these little things have a part number. Okay, let's take a look at this module here. This one here isn't actually screwed in. It's actually just bent so that it clamps down on it. You can see here we have these little holes for these little adjustable components in here. I'm not really sure if these are variable capacitors or inductors, but they've got to be one of those two. You can see here in each chamber we have similar looking circuitry. We have a transistor. They all look like they're really similar circuits. Maybe some kind of like switching circuit or something. Okay, let's take a look what's under this cover here. Under here we have some high frequency coils, and we don't have anything in the top parts. Alright, let's take off this last cover here. This one's held on by 2 screws. You can see here how they've added these little pieces of plastic so the screws don't come off. And inside these boxes here, it looks like we have similar circuits to what we found over here with these adjustable parts and transistors. And you can see here we have a high frequency wire coming in through there. Okay, I've taken out the screws and now we can see what's under this module here. And under here we have lots more components and wiring. Alright, on the back of this board we have some capacitors, resistors, and diodes. And we have a trimmer here. And over here we have this module here. This module says 20.0 megahertz, so it's probably an oscillator. And you can see we've got these 2 high frequency coax wires going to the board. This module here might create like a base frequency and send it out through the coax wire or something. You can see our main harness coming down here onto the board. Okay, now in here you can see we have our wiring harness going over here to the connector that's back behind here. You can see this thicker coax wire here coming from over here, going through this wiring loom and connecting to the high frequency connector on the main connector. And I believe that wire is coming from our transmitting module over here and carrying out the high frequency, high power antenna signal. You can see back here we have a transformer. We have 2 transistors here and a capacitor on the top of them. It looks like here we have a relay. We have 2 transistors here, some more trimmers that are accessible through the top here, through that hole. And we have a lot more resistors and capacitors throughout this space here. And we have some kind of integrated circuit over here in this. And we can see a lot of the wiring comes from the connector, goes up along here, and then it splits up and connects to these pins here. So those must go through to the other module here on the other side. And we'll take a closer look at that later. Over here you can see we have another high frequency wire coming from the front of the unit and going to the module on the other side. And this other coax wire looks like it goes through to the other side as well. This big capacitor here is 750 microfarad, 50 volts DC. We have this little capacitor here. One leg is going to the transformer, and it looks like the other leg is going to ground. Alright, now that we know what's under here, we can move on to the other side. Alright guys, here's the other side. You can see we have this big cover on this big module here. Alright, here's the cover. As always, the screws are unable to come out because of the little ring around it. Okay, under here we have a circuit board. We have this module here and this module here. We have some nice gold ceramic chips here. These chips here are actually blue, which is kind of weird. I've never seen blue chips before. Now this stuff here is probably basic logic processing. It looks like up here we have some sort of connector, which most of the traces go to. I'm going to take out the screws holding off the circuit board and let's see if there's anything interesting underneath it. Okay, this board lifts up like this, and you can see here we have this big connector on the back. No other components on the back though. You can see this board is pretty decent thickness. Beneath this board we have another board with some more logic processing stuff. We have some capacitors and 2 transistors, and we've got a trimmer over here. It looks like we have a crystal oscillator over here. It looks like we have a variable inductor here, and we have some components mounted upright on these little plastic pieces, which is kind of interesting. There's another transistor down there. We have some more of those vertically mounted parts and some capacitors there. We have some connections going into this module here, and we have a few wires going into this module here. Okay guys, I wasn't able to get the cover off this module yet, but I did discover that this whole big module here actually pulls up out of this frame here, and it disconnects. You can see here we have these holes in the bottom so the pins can go through and into the connectors here. And the 2 wires that went through on this side go through to these 2 connectors here, and those connect to this module. These are all the bottoms of the Teflon standoffs for mounting the components, and these screws here are for mounting the transistors that were on the other side. Okay, now that I've taken the nuts off these 2 screws here, I can take the inner module out, and here's that inner module. And here's the aluminum cover. Another really cool detail about this is we have these long posts here and these 4 corners, and those actually correspond with these tubes here on all four corners. So when we go to put this on, the posts go into the tubes and it perfectly lines it up. So each one of these pins will perfectly go into the connector, which is a very cool design. These pins here also go through the connectors on this circuit board and this circuit board. So both of these boards use those pins. So some of these pins are probably used by this board and some are probably used by this board, but they just are mounted together. Okay, so we have this piece of aluminum here that it looks like stuff is mounted to. And you can see these two screws here continue through this piece of metal and probably into this box here. We can see we have this other module here that's held on by this screw. This, it says 9 kilohertz LP. Maybe that stands for low pass. Maybe it's like a low pass filter. But it says in and out here. And there is another trimmer right here, I just noticed. So let's take this nut off and see if we can see anything. Okay, so I did take this screw off and it does move around a little bit, but it is permanently connected to this module here. There's probably some wires that go through and connect the two. So these two wires are probably the input here. It goes through here. Then the output goes from this module into this module. And the two high frequency connectors go into this module. So some kind of high frequency stuff in here. Well, taking these nuts off here really didn't help getting this off, but I did manage to get the cover off here. And you can see this is filled with some kind of foam. And there's no way to see what's in there because it's all potted in foam. I really don't want to destroy this piece by digging through it, but I'm sure there's probably some high frequency components and stuff in here. Alright guys, so that's about it for this Collins VHF transceiver. I hope you guys enjoyed watching, and make sure you're subscribed because I have much more avionics to take apart.